Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Great Women in Compliance, sponsored by Corporate Compliance Insights and produced by the Compliance Podcast Network. My co-host and I, Lisa Fine, are thrilled to host this podcast and bring to you phenomenal women who are both elevating the profession in inspiring ways while sending the elevator back down for others. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest for this episode, Juliana Molina. Juliana is a seasoned ethics and compliance professional with a passion for transforming business culture and making compliance and ethics programs more human-centric. Juliana, welcome to the Quick podcast. We're so delighted you could join us today.
Hi, Hema. Thank you so much. Thank you and Lisa for the opportunity to be here and, of course, share some experiences and insights with our listeners. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. We're so grateful to you. You are obviously already a part of the GWIC community. In fact, I think we first met in person at the SCCE conference in Chicago last year. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
So I felt like we were already fast friends thanks to LinkedIn and GWIC, but it was just a joy and a delight to be able to see you and give you a hug in person. And if I remember correctly, I was about to plan my trip to Brazil to visit my Brazil team in my job at Zendesk. And I remember asking you for advice because I was concerned that we might be a bit US-centric. And I wanted to make sure I understood everything I could about how I could best make the use of my time in Brazil. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Actually, we were having a coffee while having this conversation.
Yes, I wanted you to share some of the advice you gave me because it was a magnificent success and mainly in part to the fact that you were so generous and so kind in helping me do my job better and do a hard thing for me well. So let me ask you to share with the listeners the advice you gave me because it was so pivotal to me.
No, that's great to hear. And I'm glad that it helped and worked out well with you. I think, again, one of the things that we as US-centric organizations, right? Most of the headquarters are based here. Sometimes we miss the opportunity to understand the local culture of the countries where we operate. And in that case, you were asking me about, hey, Juliana, help me out to understand the Brazilian culture. And I said, Hema, building relationships is going to be important. You don't know how they are doing over there. You don't know, you need to construct and build a personal relationship and trust before you conduct business, right? That way you are respecting the culture aspects, like the norm over there. And I think that can help and establish a positive relationship with local stakeholders. By doing that, you are showing them some faith on their thing, right? They know what they are doing. It's not someone coming from the US and telling them what they need to do, right? I think the communication style also helps. Understanding that Brazilians are very expressive and value verbal communication is also a thing. Understanding the nuances over that communication. And I think it does not apply only for Brazil. It applies really to any culture or any country that we are traveling into to connect. And I think if I'm not mistaken, you even had put together later than a presentation showing like places in the country that could resonate to the local people. So grabbing their attention by using their own local art, local spaces, valuing the culture in the country really changed the perception. And I can't remember, but I think the things that you say, the attitude you have for the first time you were in the country really make them to feel more open and try to connect with you. So I don't know if you can share that with us in the sense how this helped you, really, because we didn't have a time to catch up afterwards.
No, 100%. And when I said to you it was pivotal, I mean, it really made me think about my approach. And it wasn't going to be me going and telling anyone anything, quite frankly. Like I didn't try to teach anything or train anything. In fact, I did the opposite. But after our conversation, I put a short video together to say I was coming and to tell people why I was coming. And really the only purpose was to get to know people. And I said that I would like to make sure we're not a US-centric company. I'd like to build out my regional compliance programs. And I didn't want to make assumptions as to know how to do that well. And would they help me with that? Would they give me a chance to talk to me and help me learn what might work, not just for Brazil and LATAM, but also globally, which was wonderful. So just that air of curiosity really helped. And you're quite right. I had a town hall booked and I didn't have a presentation. I wasn't sure. I was a bit catatonic, honestly. What was I going to do? But being nosy and greedy as I am, I went to Brazil a couple of days earlier. So I went for the weekend. I'm like, I can't go all the way to my dream country and not see the country. And I asked the gentleman that was able to pick me up from the airport if he had time to show me the city that weekend. So the driver very graciously spent 5 hours with me showing me the city. And I had my iPhone. I took lots of pictures. I went to dinner on the Sunday with some of my colleagues to learn a bit more about the team. And then that night, Sunday night, probably 11 o'clock, the day before I had my meeting, I decided to put my presentation together. And I had the inspiration of using the photos I'd just taken. So it was wonderful. I'd been to the museum. I'd been to the Batman Alley, which has some gorgeous artwork. I'm not going to call it graffiti. It's just gorgeous artwork. I was able to pepper my presentation with that. I took a picture of my first meal, took a picture of the football shirt I bought because I was going to a game later that week. And really, you're right. I think the teams were really moved. And they really appreciated that I'd taken the time to get to know them and their city before I'd met them. So that made a huge difference right off the bat.
Yes, because that's, again, it's you getting to their culture, not the other way around, right? And since it was your first time in the country with your team, that was your opportunity to really connect with the team, understand the limitations the team have, right? Because, again, US, Brazil, and any other really country, they have their own limitations, and sometimes they try to do the best they can with their abilities, but within their limitation, local one. So I think that really helps me, and I guess the audience, to see and understand how important understanding the culture of a country is for you to have your compliance and ethics program being more effective. So I'm happy to hear that. We didn't have time to catch up on that.
So it really made all the difference. And I mean, there's more to tell, but I want to talk more about you and your advice.
Sure.
For transformation of culture, because it really is what we're talking about. First, you've got to align with the culture you've got, but also once you get that trust and you hear from people that things might not be as they should or optimal, what's our role as ethics and compliance professionals in transformation of culture?
Yes, I think transforming culture is a complex and ongoing process, right? It requires commitment, effort, and I'm going to be honest, I think it does include a strategic approach. I don't think talking about culture without defining the strategy of it is going to help. So defining the desired culture of your company, what you want your program to look like, just rules and regulations, which again, that's very much, I would say, the mindset in many organizations, especially if they are led by attorneys, right? We tend in the US to think and structure our compliance program on rules and regulations. But also, if we want to define the values, right, behind it, the ethical aspects, the behaviors, the attitudes that we wanted to cultivate in our organization, I think that is what's going to serve as a guide for a transformation effort. Mm-hmm. We are going to take into consideration while implementing, creating a compliance program and everything that comes with it, right? Communications, trainings, how do we want to be seen, how we are going to be leading by example, which is the second part of the strategic approach that I'm talking about. Like how we are going to get senior leaders to really embody the desired culture and demonstrating their commitment to change through actions and decisions. Because you know what? You know better than me. Sometimes that's really what lacks in some organizations. The lack of example from the leadership is what undermines the culture of the organization and ultimately the program, right? So you cannot even say a program is effective when your leadership is not walking the talk. Communicating effectively. Yes, of course, we all have a lot of problems when we are trying to communicate. Sometimes we mean something and it's understood something else by the audience, either because of the language we are using or because we are not taking the time to understand the language in that culture. Because again, all countries are different, and you probably also faced that as well. And you cannot talk, I don't know, you cannot talk with Asia in the same way you talk to Latam. And even with that, within the regions, you have the differences in style and wording. And we could talk an hour about how difference we have on words and the way we communicate.
As you're talking, you're so right. I mean, it makes me think it's easy, isn't it, for us to say, live your values, be a model, make sure you show those in the way you show up and communicate. But sometimes just people, despite their good intentions, aren't able to operationalize that. So I want to really dig a bit deeper as to what's going on there. I do believe most leaders have the intention to live values and model them, right? I do believe that. But what is it? What happens along the way that again, there's a gap between the good intentions and the operational reality? Let's dig a little bit in a human way. Let's have radical empathy and figure out what's happening here.
Yes, and again, I think it comes back to culture. Mm-hmm. So there are some cultures that are really afraid to talk, afraid to speak, even when it's nothing really important, but it's something that they should talk or discuss or even ask their own manager. But there are, again, cultural differences. There are countries that you, just the simple fact of speak or ask the question is going to get you penalized and maybe retaliated against it. So I think we all from the compliance community are used to speak up campaigns. Yes. I'm sorry. So I think we are all really up to this. But the reality of the situation is that in some countries, speaking up or even ask a question is a problem, right? And again, why it's a problem? Because the leadership do not understand, right? And they retaliate against someone who asks a simple question, because if that question is being asked and the question is going to lead to or result into something that's supposedly not to be told or shared with anyone, that person is already put on a spot. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I think, again, for us to be able to empower our employees to talk and speak and ask questions and say, hey, I don't know about this. Can you help me to understand this? I think we need to have a clearly communication. We have to clearly communicate the vision we have as an organization. And also, I would say we need to have our leaders backing us up. They are the ones who can help and contribute and drive the change. So if they allow people to speak up and ask questions, they are leading by example. They are allowing it without taking retaliation against them. I think at least that's what I can think of right now as we speak on a way of encouraging people to raise concerns and also encourage them to take ownership of the process.
Yes, nice.
That sounds important. I mean, we can give employees the tools, resources, but if we don't give the authority and the ownership for them, I think that's, again, undermines the program, undermining the culture. So does that make any sense?
It does. It makes a ton of sense. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, we do call the campaign Speak Up campaigns, but more and more I'm hearing colleagues, I'm being inspired by colleagues in the industry having Hear Me campaigns or Listen Up campaigns with a focus on how you receive the information. And you've quite rightly identified there's something, I don't think people, again, intend to retaliate, but there's something uncomfortable about speaking up against the status quo. It's like change is something to be feared and status quo is safe. Even though we might all be spinning our wheels and churning on the status quo, for some reason, an idea about changing or challenging the status quo feels like more work. What I've tried to do is reframe that, which is, I don't know that I can do my job unless I have a fully informed choice as a leader. And therefore, I'd be getting in my own way if I made people, even inadvertently, made them reluctant to speak up to me about something I ought to know.
Yes.
Again, because the information is just that. It shouldn't trigger us to feel afraid of change. It should be information that we can absorb and use to make fully informed decisions.
Exactly. And there is nothing wrong there, right? And it may not even be a case for speaking up, right? Maybe not a concern like that's going to put the company at risk, but it may be a concern for that employee, how they feel. Like for this employee, maybe something is bothering the employee, is concerning the employee, that the employee may be not able to do his job or her job. So even that small thing reflects the culture.
That is the culture. No, the way that employees feel, whether we like it or not, is the culture.
Is the culture. So again, we all are very resilient in the profession, in my view. We need to be patient, right? Culture change takes time. There are setbacks that needs to be expected because that's how it is. But we need to stay committed to the process and continue to adjust our approach as needed, right? Because again, we only have a strategic approach. This will change because everything changes.
Everything changes constantly.
Yes,
right.
Yes, as we go. But again, I think we can gradually transform our organization's culture to better align with our vision and goals, right? Either our company vision and goals, but also our own goal as a human-centric person. I know we've heard many compliance professionals, Adam before, Mary Shirley, and yourself, Lisa, talking about being more human-centric, right, when implementing compliance. So I think we need to be mindful that behind everything, there is a person.
Yes. Oh, never a truer word said. Talk to me. Human-centric is my favorite talk track. I know you say it yourself as well. What does human-centric mean for you then in your professional life?
Look, I think understanding and addressing the needs, behaviors, experiences of people involved, not just employees. If we understand that we are all human beings and we all have our own experiences, right? Comes from different backgrounds, different way of living. If we place a strong emphasis on understanding and addressing the needs, behaviors, experiences, I think it really helps us. And it also involves recognizing that compliance is not just about following rules and regulations. Again, I come back to this point. It's also about creating a positive and ethical organizational culture, prioritizing the well-being and dignity of individuals. But truly, again, we need to have empathy, right? Understanding the perspectives and experiences of others, including those that are affected by compliance policies and procedures.
Right.
Before creating those, go and understand their jobs, go to the business, understand how they would be impacted when we are trying to create or implement something. Because that way we are showing them we are not trying to be a burden on them, but we are trying to be their partner by understanding what they do, how this is going to impact, some empathy.
Empathy. No, it's all that. And it goes back to what we were saying. I'm sorry to interrupt you. It goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. Rather than me go and tell my Brazil team there's going to be a new regional compliance program function, actually co-create that with them and leverage their strengths and their insights in order to make it fit for purpose. I think that's, again, seeing the whole human and seeing that we're not here to impose. In fact, we're here to reflect what we're seeing. No, that's really...
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, it's only one culture reflected in different ways.
Yes.
But it's one culture. So I think doing that, using that understanding, it also helps the decision-making process, right? Because you are understanding the perspectives, you are understanding the experiences, you are understanding who are going to be affected by the policies changes, or really whatever we decide to change as an organization, processes. We have a lot of processes in our organizations, right? Or a lack of processes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have to create them. Again, then we go back to communication. Engage in open, honest, and transparent way with them. If you don't understand something yourself, even though you are in a higher position, tell your employee, I'm trying to help you, but I do not understand how. So show me, how can I support you better? What are your expectations? What do you expect from me as a compliance professional? Again, that is my human-centric approach. Why I believe that is important. Compliance expectations, requirements, process. Why am I asking you to do certain thing? Because usually, again, if we try to impose, in my experience, we are going to get the opposite.
100%. No, you've hit so many wonderful points there. I mean, I think to myself, at Zendesk, we have the value, we care. At Snapchat, it was kindness. Like these things brought to life are exactly what you've just said. It's being human-centric, being interested and leveraging the strengths of those around us and being curious. My favorite framework is radical compassion, radical curiosity, radical empathy. And if you use those three tools, you will learn what you need to make fully informed choices. And you said that it goes down to our decision-making process too. I also,
Absolutely.
before we move on, I wanted to say you've also hit on my other favorite thing, which is the compliance customer experience. This idea that these employees are our customers and they deserve a good service from us as compliance professionals. And what again does that mean? That means we're thinking about what they need. Customers will only be satisfied and come back if you do that, right? If you come from that customer-centric, human-centric perspective.
Exactly. And I think, again, understanding that, recognizing that one size fits all approach is not what we are looking for. And I know people are tired of listening to this, but I keep saying this because there are companies that are still trying to make one size fits all, and that approach does not work, allowing for flexibility in how compliance is going to be implemented to accommodate diverse needs and circumstances. So again, if we understand the business and we partner with the business, we don't make decisions for the business. They are the ones to make decisions. We help them by providing the right information. What are the consequences of the actions that you're going to take, right? What are the processes that are missing that need to be created to ensure their safety, these employees' safety? It's not the other side, it's their own life. So again, Hema, I think if we do that way, wearing their shoes and not telling them what to do, but what are the consequences they might face depending on the route they take, that's a choice, which goes back to, hey, they're going to be leading by example and demonstrate a commitment to the choices that they decided to take. Right?
They really are. I want to go back though, Juliana, to what I said earlier. This all seems like common sense. It seems like it's not rocket science, but in the implementation, it often goes wrong. And I'm trying to get the empathy there for the leaders that are tasked with culture, tasked with strategy on culture, but also think of it as a behemoth task and they're only one person and how can they change a culture? So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. I mean, I love that phrase, you get the culture you deserve, which seems very harsh, right? But if we are going to lean into our power to impact culture at scale, we are going to get the culture we deserve. If we're going to be too afraid or think we don't have that positional power and influence to change culture. Yes. I mean, I always say we've inherited a thing. Most of us come to a job and we've inherited a thing. There's a culture that predates us. And we might say, what do you expect? This is what I inherited. But I like to say, as leaders, we have the opportunity and responsibility to either make it better or inadvertently make it worse, right? So we're going to have to think about that. We don't want to inadvertently make it worse. The status quo is not always great. So how can we lean into our responsibility to make it better once we've inherited it and really start to see ourselves as someone that is a person of influence here? Like, where do we start if we've inherited a culture that's just not where it needs to be?
Again, I think it's not one person only that's going to make the whole thing. Usually, so when we are talking about leadership or toxic leaders, or you get the culture as you deserve, I think that affirmation, as harsh as it sounds, it's true. Because again, toxic leaders can poison organizational culture, making workplaces unsafe and unhealthy, right? And again, when unethical behaviors goes unchecked, it becomes normalized, affecting everyone. So how do we change that? In my view, we change that by starting from the bottom to the top in that case, because again, the top down is not going to work. If the top down is where it is being toxicated, then we have to start from the bottom, working with the people, building trust, building connection, trying to understand the organizational goals, how the organizational goals are tied up to each of the departments, and to ultimately to the people, right? Once again, I think if we all agreed that organizations must hold the leaders the toxic ones, accountable, they will ultimately promote ethical leadership and set clear expectations. And again, the problem are people are afraid to talk, right? They are. And of course, why they are afraid? Because sometimes, as we are talking about the leadership, if the leadership is toxic, they should be afraid to talk because they know there will be consequences for talking, right? In that case, and I'm not saying all companies are like that. It's quite the opposite. Most companies have a very good and true leadership, right? But there are others that they have a toxic ones. You have two choices in my view. You either work with your team, your compliance team, and your peers from the bottom and try to build up, because again, remember, culture is a journey. So it's going to change, but it will take time. Or the second choice is you leave the organization, right? And you leave the organization because that organization does not align with your values. Again, I know it may be, not everyone can do that, and I understand not everyone can leave from a toxic organization. But at the end of the day, our well-being is important to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, 100%.
And again, act decisively to maintain the health and integrity of our company is what we all were looking for. But if that environment is not what we are expected because of the leaders that has poisoned the organization, then we have to make a move and find a place where our values align better. Again, compliance and ethics, in my view, is more about values than technical skills, because the technicity you can learn, but the values, you were born or raised with them, in my view.
Yeah. So Juliana, I love so much where you're going with this. And I want to just focus a little bit more on what you said about this idea of toxicity in leadership, because I have this sense, again, coming with radical empathy and radical compassion and radical curiosity, that people aren't born toxic, right? Leaders don't start with the intentions to be toxic, but sometimes you have this kind of, if I can't beat them, I'll join them kind of mentality, right? And if you don't feel empowered to leave, as you said,
yes,
you may assume the culture that you've inherited yourself. You may, just out of fear that you can't change anything, feel that you need to just turn a blind eye. And I think that's something we also need to think about, is what conditions are we creating where leaders become toxic in the way you've described? Because that also is a problem, right? If we aren't creating the culture that everybody deserves, we will then reinforce the culture that nobody wants. As I said, when we say you get the culture you deserve, if you don't realize that you have the power to make it better by doing nothing, you might just inadvertently make it worse, because the people that won't be toxic will leave, and the people that don't know how to be anything but toxic will stay, right? And I think that's important as well for empathy. I don't think anybody wakes up wanting to be a toxic leader. It's a horrible word, but we do find that if you can't beat them, join them phenomenon happening in these organizations. So something also to look out for, the retention piece, to your point, but also the model the behavior you want, and don't tolerate the behavior that you shouldn't be tolerating. And that might mean coaching and spotting it early, right? It doesn't have to be always going to the nth degree of bad behavior. It can be look out for those warning signs when somebody's trying to help and they've been pushed back on, or they're exasperated. They may turn into somebody that will be described as toxic because they're now just letting it happen or not feeling capable of making a difference. And that really
and I think again that comes back to these leaders that joined that environment and that it changed along the way. They are humans as well. What were the reasons for them to join? Maybe it's money. They are well paid, positioned, and they know they may be difficult to move to a different role. So they say, you know what, I'm gonna turn my blind eyes to that, because again, I'm being well paid, recognized with the leadership. And for some people, that's what matters most. To other people, that's going to be just unacceptable, right? I cannot overcome this and I need to leave. So again, leaders are the makers and shapers of organizational culture, right? When they are allowed to operate unethically without consequences, or worse, when they are praised for attaining results despite their unethical behavior, what is going to happen? Toxicity will spread and become the norm, making the workplace completely unsafe, right? So comes back to empathy, right? The person who is going to be on the other side, if the person does not understand that environment and do not see empathy from others towards them, they are going to change. They're going to leave the organization, most likely, when they have an opportunity. And why? Because this is going to be affecting their own well-being and the culture of the organization. That's the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
At that moment.
Right.
I don't know.
Safety is really key, and we've talked about psychological safety a lot on this podcast and how you create it. I think you've given us some great tips there. Juliana, I want to pivot a little bit to a talk you did recently with Felipe Maldonado at Fordham Law. I was very intrigued about this, and we talked about decision-making and of leaders, but now I want to pivot to ethical decision-making in the way that our employees were trying to help with that, facilitating that. And you compared the mastery of ethical decision-making to the successful execution of an April Fool's prank. What on earth is that about? You had me at ethical decision making, obviously, but what is an April Fool's trap when it comes to ethics and compliance?
So we were discussing, and it was like a very fun engagement because we highlighted the importance of organizational culture, emphasizing that culture was not just about what was said, but also about what was done, especially when, again, no one was watching. And we came to share that how we need to understand the nuances of culture and behaviors with compliance and norms, because sometimes we don't take into consideration, again, we don't take into consideration those aspects, and we do not avoid a trap, right? Again, so Felipe and I were sharing the experience we had, how the compliance community together would be able to help, and not just the compliance program, but like the career development of the people, walk the talk, the importance of values, which I told you before cannot be taught. It comes with one. And how that would be, like we made an analogy with that and the compliance trap. I'm just looking for one example that we used. Both of us were saying, Felipe and I were talking about the April Fool's Day and how it compared with the compliance program, right? How important it is to understand the culture, how important it is to have ethical considerations, build trust as we spoke, communication, be resilient. And then you may say, hey, but what does this have to do with April Fool's? April Fool's Day pranks can sometimes have a blur the line between harmless fun and potentially harmful or offensive behavior, right?
Yes.
And again, as someone who specializes in ethics, we need to understand the importance of considering ethical implications when planning pranks and how this relates to broader ethical decision-making and compliance. And again, that comes back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Understanding the culture of where we are going to be doing things that we're supposed to do, changing policies, procedures, delivering training, communications. If we understand the implications behind when planning pranks and how this relates to the thing that we are planning to deliver, that is going to help, right? Because again, if we don't associate the risk with what we are doing, we may get into trouble.
So smart, yeah.
So again, we were discussing on how both compliance and April Fool's Day pranks requires adaptability and resilience, and how these parallel can provide a unique perspective that highlights the relevance, again, of ethical decision-making and to the both scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we were trying to bring to people into that session and to reason it to them that sometimes we make pranks without considering the effect it's going to have, the impact it's going to have. And that's something that we as compliance professionals should be thinking about when planning something. whatever we are planning to do. How this is going to be received? What is the impact it's going to have?
It's funny you should say that, because I've been having conversations with my new boss. Told me very easy, because she said there was a lot of great activities in my function and she'd love to hear more about the impact. And it was just so mind-blowing, that framing of, we do spend a lot of our time as ethics professionals lining up activities. And we really do need to be thinking first about the impact of those activities before we do the activities. So lots of checkbox things, lots of things the guidance says we should be doing. But as you've highlighted with Felipe so elegantly, it's the impact that's everything. And you should be designing for impact, not for activity. So good. I love that.
Yes. Again, one wrong turn, one overlooked regulation, and you could find yourself in the middle of compliance bootstrap.
Yes.
Facing repercussions that could have been avoided with careful navigation or attention to detail. Again, there are some pranks that sounds or seems harmless and amusing, but akin to a minor compliance oversight can be quickly rectified, so.
Yeah, very clever. I love that. Oh, we could talk about this all day. I think I need a whole panel just on the April Fool's prank.
It was so fun. It was very nice. And after the event, after the panel, Emma, what really resonated to us is that we were reached out from some of these students, the Fort Huntsy students, asking us in private questions related to the panel on how could we help on having them either applying these April Fool's trap thing into their program. How should they be considering that when getting to a new organization and getting to a new role? So it was so enlightening.
I love that. You're inspiring the next generation of April Fool's pranks. No, I'm kidding. Ethics and compliance professionals. I love that. Gosh, we're going to be running out of time, but one thing I did want to cover before we end is how important female empowerment is to you. I know you've done some talks on that as well, including specifically strategically tackling obstacles to pave your path to success as a female in ethics and compliance. So let you talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so I think it's important for us that we are having more space now than we used to talk and discuss. And we are having organizations and different departments to listen to us better, to understand better our needs. I also think we have a lot of female colleagues that are helping us out and voicing out the needs we have and how we have to be received by everyone, really, right? One thing that I was going to say is that by helping others and guiding others, giving a space, providing a space like this one here that you were providing me with, help us to be heard, to be seen. I also want to say that after the pandemic, many organizations understood, I think, better the role of the women in the society, in the organization they were in, because during the pandemic, everyone were working from home. The kids were home. For the people who have no kids, they have their pets, which is also important to understand. We were talking about that in one of the panels I recently had. There was one of my colleagues, she didn't have kids, and she said, I am always penalized for not having kids, and I'm always expected by my employers that I can overwork, I can do extra hours just because I do not have kids. What about the empathy towards me as well? And again, that's those things that we are doing, voicing our concerns out to the society, discussing, bringing it to different groups to discuss with our employers. I think that is a way to overcome the obstacles, right? That we already have just for being women, right? Networking sessions are really powerful as well. Network with other women from different levels. They all can teach you something that helps you to tackle this obstacle and pave the path to success. So I think what I would say, just to wrap up, is that being out there, voice your concern, find a space like this one, join women's group, Get your husband, your boyfriend, your father to talk about things that concerns most around women and just for being women. I think that helps to change the culture, right? It's a long journey, but we were years ahead if we compared how we were 30, 40, 50 years ago compared to our parents, where before women could not even work. And look how amazing women we have in the workforce today, right? We still have a long journey to go. There are not many that are on a C-suite level or above, or board members, yes, but we are working towards that. That's how we would end our podcast today.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it does bring us full circle, because if there was a toxic culture of female disempowerment back in the day, it's taken all of us to speak up, to feel seen, heard, and valued, and to receive that information in these safe spaces to improve that vastly. So what a wonderful way to end this podcast. Thank you so much, Juliana. I'm so inspired. I'm grateful to you. Thank you for being part of this community. The GWIT community is grateful to have you creating safe spaces. And we're just, again, delighted to have hosted you here today. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you and Lisa for giving me the opportunity to share the experiences I have. So thank you.
We're all better off for it. Thank you, Juliana. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.